Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel, taking place today in the Council Chamber of the Guildhall in Bath. Could I remind everyone that the meeting is being webcast, and could I ask those contributing to kindly say their names before they speak, and actually remember to turn their microphones off after they've made their contribution. Could I also mention to those watching at home that the agenda for these meetings is available via the Have Your Say tab on the Council website, and that members of the public are very much invited to attend the panel and also make statements to the panel if they wish to. The remit of the panel is given on the website, along with the Democratic Services Office's email address, and that can be used for more information and to submit a statement. I'd also like to welcome a new member to the panel, Councillor George Tomlin. Welcome, George, who will be taking the place of Councillor Onkar Saini, who has stood down from the committee due to taking on a new role within the Cabinet team. Can we move on to the emergency evacuation procedure, please?
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I'm not aware of any apologies for absence or substitutions. No, thank you. I'm moving on to any declarations of interest. I haven't been made aware of any declarations of interest in advance. Could panel members indicate if they have a declaration of interest to declare? So we are noting no declarations of interest from the panel. I would just like to mention that I myself have a project role that is related to Cabinet, but I have in no way contributed to the agenda item that is coming before us, and I don't regard that I have an interest on this particular item. As always, if something does crop up during the meeting, please do let us know and indicate this to the Democratic Services officers. Next, urgent business agreed by the Chair. I understand that there's no urgent business. No, thank you. I've not been notified of any public or councillor statements this time. Moving on to the minutes of the last meeting, I'd like to ask for confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting held on the 14th of May. Are there any questions relating to those minutes? And if not, can I move them as a correct record, please? Would anyone be happy to confirm and second these as a correct record? Thank you. Councillor Blackburn? By Councillor Halsall. Thank you very much. So now we come to the Cabinet member update, item 8 on the agenda, which I believe is going to be provided by Councillor Paul Roper, the Cabinet Member for Economic and Sustainable Resources. Thank you.
Development. Thank you, Chair. Just to remind people that we've split the corporate estate from the commercial estate. It used to be one role, and we've been conscious there's been a couple of PDS meetings where on the agenda it says Cabinet Member update, and we haven't really given one. So I thought there were some points of interest relating to the corporate estate, which under my directive, and Councillor Elliott obviously has the commercial estate. So I wanted to just give some figures and some performance data regarding to the corporate estate. Yeah. So corporate estate is very varied. One of the areas is, of course, the museums and art galleries that we have. So we've got the Roman Bars and the Victoria Art Gallery, and I wanted to give you a bit of a trading update on that. The Victoria Art Gallery has got some scaffolding up at the moment. I'll talk to you about that. But we've got the excellent Masters of Montmartre exhibition with Toulouse-Lautrec, and I hope you've all been to have a look. It's great stuff. But exhibition visitors are 82% up on the year-to-date budget. So the year-to-date budget clearly wasn't ambitious enough, but so they're punching some numbers, and we've already, with 2 months to go of the exhibition, we're at 90% of the budget target, so we're clearly going to smash the budget on that. And the first quarter visitors to the exhibition were at 16,349. So that particular exhibition is proving extremely popular. And as I said, if you haven't been, do go and have a look, because it's great. The Roman Baths performance, it's 4% up on the previous year, which is good, because the previous year was also strong. But we're 6% down on budget year to date, with revenue of £292,000 versus the budget of £311,000. This is primarily due to a very poor performance in April, and there's been a number of reports actually across the entire retail and museum sector that April's performance was very poor. It may have been something to do with the timing of Easter, which Easter does happen every year, as you know, but it moves, and it may have been a budgeting error. But the performances since April have been extremely good and on budget. May and June, in fact, very close to budget. And we've now got a revised forecast submitted at the end of this quarter, which reduced the visitor numbers over the summer, but still showing a 7% growth on last year, whereas the previous budget was showing an 11% growth. So we don't think we're going to hit the 11% growth, but we'll still get the 7% growth. However, the key thing is the financing, and we're still projecting a surplus of 12.24 million for the financial year, which is significantly up on last year. And that increase, despite the slightly lower footfall, is due to income growth in some areas, including the Victoria Art Gallery. So that 12.24 million is across the Roman Baths and the Victoria Art Gallery. And also because of tighter cost controls, and also a small ticket price rise. So we're still on target to deliver the budgeted numbers, which is great. And the shop performance is also going extremely well. So far in the quarter, £758,000 worth of sales in the shop, and that's 6% up on last year. Important to note, I think, on the Roman Baths visitor sentiment, the visitor enjoyment and value for money and new Net Promoter Score are much stronger than last year. They introduced a new audio tour in April, and there's also paid-for guided tours. So the Net Promoter Score, I'm afraid I don't have the score, but I think it's up in the 60s, which, if you know anything about Net Promoter Scores, is an extremely good score. And you may have also picked up that the Roman Baths was recently named amongst the best of the best by TripAdvisor, putting it in the top 1% of attractions worldwide, based on the reviews that TripAdvisor get, which I think is quite an accolade. And finally, just to finish on the Victoria Art Gallery roof, the scaffolding's gone up. They didn't know what they were going to find until the scaffolding went up, and I'm pleased to report that the repairs that are needed are not structural. It's mainly reglazing that's needed, so that the budget that was set aside to fix that is going to be adequate. And we anticipate opening the upper gallery and the new community engagement space in November this year, although the scaffolding may stay up a little longer because they're just going to do some additional external repairs while the scaffolding's up. So that's the visitor attractions, and then briefly moving to the corporate estate proper. There's been a significant amount of work on improving the risk position across the estate. And there are several programmes of work underway. The first being asset condition and compliance. This is a programme of fire compliance works which are nearly completed on all assets with residential tenants. And basically there has been changes to the fire risks, fire regs, and so there's been a requirement to improve fire systems, and 61 properties have been assessed and initial works are being implemented. There's a programme of radon surveys underway that is mainly impacting the commercial estate, actually, and there's a schedule of a small amount of mitigation works which are being developed, but many of those works are actually falling on the tenants for compliance. There's a programme of asset condition surveys being progressed to start to reduce a backlog of planned maintenance work. The priorities are again around the commercial assets, they've now done that work, and there's now an informed programme on planned maintenance on some of our key void properties. The repair and maintenance programme of corporate and commercial estates has been defined. There are 93 properties in scope to be completed this financial year, and a number of commercial estate properties will see site works commencing over the next few months, and that includes Jolly's, New Bond Street, properties in Milsom Street, Westgate Buildings, and particularly in Broad Street. Moving to an update on the corporate landlords, the authorities moving, I repeatedly hear the term corporate landlord model. I wish I could give you a succinct description of what that actually means, but it's certainly the buzzword that we have internally. Corporate landlord, we have a new head of service. Sarah Varley left the authority, but she's been replaced by Richard Holden as of the beginning of July, and very much worked with Richard before, very much welcome this appointment. We're now investing in new IT systems to bring together our estate data. Our estate data, I think, is held on 8 IT systems at the moment, and mining data is problematic, and it's being incorporated into one integrated system. Officers are evaluating and shortlisting a preferred supplier, and that will conclude in August, which will enable us to start procurement in September and allow a system development and data migration, and it should go live later this year. If it's that quick, I should be quite surprised, because anything to do with IT is normally far more problematic than it seemed to be at the outset. One of the key service risks for corporate landlord is they're having difficulty with recruitment. Recruitment is challenging. There's an acute shortage of skilled labour, but they're mitigating this with some agency staff and supply chain resources, but they are continuing to try and recruit externally into the new corporate landlord service structure. Another key development is that the Council is developing an asset challenge framework to help identify repurposing opportunities, and this is looking at an initial sample of 30 assets across the commercial and corporate estate, and basically it is looking at our assets, taking a sample of 30 assets, randomly selected, and looking at how those assets are performing financially, what the cost base is, and basically we have over 2,000 assets as an authority, and it's extremely difficult to assess them, those which are earning us money, those which are costing us money, and also what alternative uses for those assets could be put to. So they're developing this asset challenge framework to see if that can speed up the system and unlock some of these assets which may be blocked in some way. And a precursor to that is the IT data that we need for these new IT systems, because unless we get accurate data on the assets, it's going to be a bit meaningless. But so this is it's a concentrated programme to enable us to make a better assessment of our assets. Final point now, service pressures. We have holding costs on Culver Hayes site, Lewis House and the old post office building, and they remain above budget. The post office, this is the Fashion Museum site, the costs of that are being mitigated by using meanwhile uses in the retail spaces, and I don't know whether you've seen, there are some occupants in there. But in terms of compliance and reactive maintenance in the post office site, that's now all completed. In terms of Culver Hay, following the Cabinet decision to progress the site for educational use, as you know, it's our plan now to demolish the site as quickly as we possibly can. But before that happens, we've got to consider relocation of the existing uses for the site, and it's currently one of the things, there's an alternative, an alternative provision in there at the moment, which has to be relocated. And we've also got quite a few of our archive assets, lumps of stone, sitting in there, which have to be moved out. However, we want to resolve that as quickly as possible, get the site knocked down. Finally, Lewis House, options to dispose are being considered, and officers are setting out options for operational relocations prior to any decision on disposal is completed. So we know that the police station is moving out to Plymouth House, but we also have a number of other council operations inside, such as one-stop shop, CCTV, and these sites have to be relocated. So officers are still evaluating how that can be done. Once that's sorted, then we can move to disposal. And finally, progress is being made to address key repairs and maintenance pressure. The overall asset condition is poor, and future investment will be needed once full results of condition surveys are known. So there is some general concern that some of our assets across our estate need a fair amount of repairs, but they're working on that. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Roper. And could I just say, I apologise for getting your title slightly wrong, it's Economic and Cultural Sustainable Development Portfolio. Thank you. I think we had one question, just a brief question from Councillor Halsall.
Thank you. It's a very brief question. It's regarding things that are changing within the city centre. I'm hearing rumours, certainly seeing it in the local press, that Marks & Spencer are moving to the old Debenhams building. Bath, North East Somerset have ownership of the existing store. So do we have any indication about what's going to happen to that? And what's the other point? I'll come back to you.
Can I? The M&S is well, it's not actually our asset, but I'll just defer to Councillor Elliott on that one.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. For clarity, well, we own the freehold, but there's a long leasehold still owned by M&S, so it will be M&S's responsibility it's up to them what they do with the building. Basically, they've still got a significant amount of time left on their lease. We're in discussions with them as to what they are planning to do with the building, but it is their responsibility. We get a very small ground rent from the building at the moment, so there's no significant income impact to us.
It's brilliant that we'll see Debenhams, the former Debenhams, occupied, but obviously we need to fill the hole that M&S will leave on Stall Street. My second question is regarding. Sorry, bear with me. I've just been to the opticians, so I'm still trying to work out my Culverhay. The Hindu temple. What work is in place to help them find alternative accommodation?
So Councillor McCabe and myself visited the rather lovely people at the temple just about 3 weeks ago, and they gave us a very nice impromptu lunch, which was nice. They've always known that they were going to have to leave the site. The plan at the moment, they have particular issues about relocating on certain dates, and July is one of their key relocating dates. So we think in terms of the demolition, we can leave their part. It's a completely separate building in a separate car park, the Hindu temple, and we think we can leave that building in situ, and when they relocate somewhere, we can relocate on the date that works for them from a religious perspective, which is July, so that's good. The discussions we have with them about what their options might be, it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss too much about that. I've got the task of evaluating if there are any other assets that the council hold that they might use as a temporary site, but clearly they've got to decide what they want to do. Our commitment to the temple was to try and find them an alternative location. There are a number of options, there are a number of strategies that they can adopt, and what we can do is offer them alternative space, but we've strongly advised them to get some professional advice about what they could do, because I think one of the key points that I should make actually, that until and this is not my portfolio, this is Councillor May's, but until the sites and plans are made for the two schools on site, we don't know the full space available. There's an outline idea, but it needs to be worked up, and that should come, I think, by the end of August, so we see how much space there is, and we'll then see if there's any spare space on the site, and it is possible, although obviously we have to get best value for the site, you know, it's possible that people can bid for the spare space, and so, you know, there are a number of possibilities, but I think it's important to stress, and I think the people at the temple were very keen to point out they have always known that that was a temporary site, and they always knew they would have to move out. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor Roper, and thank you for taking questions and that update on both the commercial and corporate estate, much of which is relevant to the reports to follow, and I think it only goes... I'm not sure we've got only one, well, we don't usually take questions at this time, just one quick question then. Yeah, so yes, one more question, thanks.
Okay, just for clarity, you mentioned, Paul, about mitigation works, radon, fire and what have you, but some of those works would fall on tenants. I'm just keen to understand what would we be doing to put in place the checking and making sure that those plans or remedial actions have been taken, because I think we've fallen foul of this in the past.
Yeah, well, I can get exact clarity on that, Councillor Blackburn. My understanding is that there has been a complete, there has been a complete estate-wide review, and any obligations that are contained under the lease which fall, it's either a liability for the council to remediate, or it's a liability for the tenant, and that depends on the lease terms. But I can't tell you what proportion, for example, is falling on the council and what is falling on the tenants. But I'll try and find out some detail about which bits are falling to tenants and which bits are falling to the authority.
This is as much the follow-up of, if it is on the tenants, what period of time do we give them and what checking do we do to make sure it's been done? Because I think it hasn't been done in the past.
I'll ask about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Roper. I think it only underpins how important it is having this new role, new portfolio established, as there's a lot for us to hear about what's going on in economic regeneration. Thank you. So moving on. So sorry, Councillor Moss. Yeah.
Thank you. It's following on from Colin's question as well about repairs and mitigation on buildings, as well as the requirement on ourselves and on tenants and deciding where those responsibilities lie. Can we make sure that we are clear about tenants' abilities to actually undertake capital repair work? Because the last thing you want to do is end up with repairs not being done, the work actually escalating and ending up with ourselves if you get people going bust. So there's that there. I'd also, just a comment about the asset challenge framework. That sounds really interesting, that border between, this is a liability that isn't making money for us. Oh, actually, it may well be an asset that does make money. And I think probably the example of owning mines that came up about a year ago is one where there are possibilities. It would be useful, I think, when the information is available, to actually to see a list of those assets and how they're going from one to the other. Also, and it's slightly left field, is it's good news with the art gallery roof, and that's going to be within budget and the rest, and that the space will be open in November with a community space. One thing that was brought up and it's been brought up on a number of occasions, and I'm looking around at the paintings on the wall here and in other parts of the building, When the issue of the roof came up and there was a possibility that some paintings were going to have to be put in storage, I think there were comments that don't put them in storage, put these in storage, and let's see some of these replaced, not only in here but other other rooms within the Guildhall. And while I appreciate that being a grade 1 listed building, that there's issues with that, I'm flagging it up again because I'm never entirely sure where we need to take this forward, because this has come up on a number of occasions over the last 14 years I've been on the council. And yeah, please can we retire these gentlemen?
Okay, thank you. I was seeing Councillor Halsall. Is there a response?
Yeah, it's just regarding the Victoria Art Gallery. I mean, the upper floor's been closed for quite a while. Thankfully, mercifully, we've realised that the damage isn't as severe as we feared. But is there any figure as to how much the council has lost in terms of revenue by virtue of it being closed?
I'm afraid I don't have those numbers. I can try and find out for you, but I don't have those numbers to hand today. I'm sorry. I would suggest, though, if there is a number, it will be quite small. But it's never been in true museum terms. The Victoria Art Gallery is not historically has not been made a positive contribution to the bottom line.
Yeah, okay.
So
that's fine.
But I'll try and get a number for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We have some amazing exhibitions that go on the ground floor, but just for our residents, Bath and North East Somerset residents who have their Discovery card, it's just wonderful that we have that opportunity to see our assets and our lovely exhibitions.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take one more question from Councillor Simon, and then
it was just to say that the upstairs was never chargeable. It's only the downstairs that was chargeable.
Thank you, everybody. So I think we'll move on now to the main content of the meeting. So agenda items 9, 10, and 11. When we'll hear reports from the Cabinet members and associated officers, and there's an opportunity for the panel members to ask questions of the Cabinet member, who may also refer the questions to the Council Officer for further detail. So moving to agenda item 9, the Budget Outturn Report for the last financial year, 23-24. Can I invite Councillor Mark Elliott, Cabinet Member for Resources, to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. So the report presents the Council's final figures for financial year, which ended in April. As I always point out, when we talk about the budget, we really mean two budgets: the revenue budget for ongoing costs and income, and the capital budget for one-off income and spending on assets. Those two budgets only really touch when it comes to borrowing costs, where the borrowing for the capital budget means interest charges then affect the revenue budget. So I'll start with the revenue budget. Obviously delighted that we finished the year essentially in balance. We were 130k out on a 330 million budget, which is a fantastic achievement. In order to recognise how much of an achievement, it's worth reminding ourselves that the report covers a financial year starting in April 2023. So the period started when we were only 6 months on from the Trust Kwarteng mini-budget, and inflation was still very high, borrowing costs were still rising rapidly. The impact of inflation on the Council's contract spending was severe, and by October 2023 it was clear that without urgent action the Council would be severely over budget at year end. Projection at that point was for 6.5 million negative position at year end. So at that point we implemented a range of corporate interventions: recruitment and vacancy control, control on all non-essential spend, and we started asking directors to develop mitigation plans for individual departments. By the end of December, those actions had improved the projected position quite dramatically, but we were still looking at a 1.7 million negative position by the April year end. So I think that pulling it back to being basically on target by the end of the financial year is really quite an achievement, and I want to commend all the council officers on their collective efforts to achieve that. I'd just like to emphasise it's a position that many councils and councillors will be very envious of. However, I do think we need to acknowledge that the balanced position hides a lot of variance between departments. There were significant overspends in social care and waste management, but they were mitigated by considerably better income than expected in heritage services, parking, and lower borrowing costs in the resources portfolio. I know everyone on this committee is aware of how important our heritage assets are, and Councillor Roper was just talking about them, and how important our tourist industry is. But I want to emphasise again how fortunate we are to have these as council-owned assets. That does mean that the income that comes in via tourism doesn't just get focused on Bath and in the private sector. It means it's redistributed across the authority area, and it helps to mitigate things like the huge increase in social care costs. Having highly capable, commercially aware officers running these departments is one of the reasons why, despite the huge pressures in social care and elsewhere, we are able to balance the books, and we're still able to have the fourth lowest council tax in the South West. Turning to the capital budget, we spent just under 19 million less than we had budgeted for in the year, 63.5 million against the budget of 82.2. The difficulty with capital budgets is that while spending 18.7 million less than planned sounds brilliant, what this really represents is mostly projects slipping into the next financial year. So whilst it does save us money in that year on financing costs, it's not necessarily an all-round good thing. Ideally, we'd be budgeting for what we are actually able to spend, rather than overestimating in the budget and then underspending in reality. Spending 77% of the capital budget is actually an improvement on the previous 4 years, as you can see from the bar chart on page 29 of the report pack. I'd like to see that trend towards more accurate capital budgeting continue through my years in this position. There is a genuine underspend of about 1.3 million included in that 18.7 million figure. So that really is good news. And most of that comes from an underspend of over £1 million on the Bath Western Riverside project. I'd also like to highlight that our capital financing requirement is over 121 million higher than our borrowing. So that's the gap between what we could have on paper borrowed, needed to borrow in order to finance the capital programme, and what we actually borrowed. And that's largely down to the great work of the Treasury Management function, making sure that our borrowing profile, making sure we use our cash reserves effectively and that our borrowing profile is right. As I said at Cabinet, Council Balance's budget is unlikely to be a headline-grabbing item, but given the very, very difficult financial landscape we've experienced over the last couple of years, I think it is something to celebrate. So I'm very happy to take questions and to involve officers, if need be, on answering the questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Elliott. And I'll take some questions. Yes, Councillor Tweedy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Mark. My question comes back around the capital programme, and really good that you're acknowledging there that the spending the 63 million against the 82 isn't really where we want to be. It looks like it's a trend which has always been there, in that we're always budgeting on the capital programme more than we actually go and spend. Would you be able to come back and tell us how we can go and close that gap more and things in the future?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. And in the next item, actually, I'll be reporting on the fact that at the moment we're looking like we are going to improve it on it this year. I can't remember what, I'll have a look in a second at what we're actually tracking it at in this year, and I think I've got the figure in my introduction to the next report. But yes, I'm very happy to report back on that. I mean, a lot of that's to do with programme and project management, effectively, and just not over egging what we think we can do in any given year from a capital development point of view.
And that's right, isn't it? We get expectations which are set there with our residents, and if we can then only go and deliver 3/4.
Yeah, and
there are of them, then we pick some cop up about why we're not delivering what we said.
Absolutely, and there are some areas where we are successfully managing to deliver a great deal more than we have done in previous years. I mean, our on the transport programme, we've been very ambitious, and that is looking pretty good at the moment. So, you know, the highways improvement programme is considerably higher in budget than it has been in previous years. That's part of that capital budget, and it looks like it's on track. So that's good news. But yeah, I'm as I said, I would like to see that gap coming down, even if it is by reducing the budget number to something that's more realistic and expected.
Thank you. Councillor Blackburn.
Yeah, thank you for the information. I just wanted to ask about the £1 million underspend, or as you alluded to, it was a very positive position from the Western Riverside project. What does that £1 million entail? Because obviously we're not spades in the ground there yet on Western Riverside, so I just want to understand what you were referring to and how did that £1 million saving happen?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'll see if any officers do. Yeah, Gary, looks like he can take that.
Thank you. Gary Adams, Head of Financial Management. Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. The £1 million underspend was related to the public realm following removal of an old pipework bridge there, and we were able to get WECA funding for that, which released some council funding as well as some general costs coming in lower than budgeting on that public realm scheme around the area.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Just one tiny question, Mark. On the line about council solicitor and democratic services, the variance there around the Baines council elections costing more than expected. Obviously, we then expected general election this year, and now 2 elections in this financial year, with the PCC elections followed by this one. Are we still seeing that overspend in elections being ministered, and what was the cause of the overspend? Do we know?
I'm not aware of an overspend actually in that service area. I don't know this year that we're tracking this year, but then I suspect we won't have had the figures for this election yet. Is that correct?
There's different ways of funding depending. So the general election, those costs are normally covered by central government, whereas local elections, the council has to fund themselves. So we do build up a provision for those costs over the 4-year cycle, create a reserve. I think there was a slight difference. It cost more than we'd built up in those over the 4 years for the local election.
Thank you. I think that's everybody. Yeah, I had a couple of questions, Councillor, but not really to detract from the great result, really, of almost a practically balanced budget. I just wanted to know the mitigations that we brought in to get to this position at the end. Which had the most impact of the mitigations that were brought in to correct the overspend that we were seeing towards the end of the financial year? I had a couple of other questions. Home to school transport, you know, have we a strategy this year? So we ended up with a 1.42 million overspend, and are there any, have we got some solutions coming forward this year to avoid the same situation? Heritage, the heritage budget contributed a positive variance of almost 3 million, and the budget has now been rebased to that extent, I think. Just wondered whether it was, the rebase was to that extent or slightly less. And finally, thinking about the capital budget, and as you say, the capital underspend is, you know, not necessarily positive, and have we got steps in place maybe to get more capital delivery? I'm thinking of the new posts on contract management, where we bring all the we've taken steps to bring all the contract management together under one post. Are we expecting that to mean we're delivering more of our capital programme?
I've now forgotten what your first question was, and I didn't make a note. I do apologise. Can you go back to the first one?
So the first question was, what was the main mitigation really that brought us back? You know, there's a series of mitigations, aren't there? usually hold some holding staff posts, and that we put into place to deliver a balanced budget in the end.
Yeah,
yeah.
Sure. I don't know if you've got breakdown. You got breakdown, Andy? Thank you.
Hi everyone, Andy Rothery, Executive Director for Resources and 151 Officer. So the mitigations were kind of split. So if we go back to the original overspend that was forecast, I think it was around £6.5 million. Roughly half of that was corporate mitigation. So some of it is slowing down the capital programme, not stopping it, slowing it down, but then we don't take out as much borrowing, and borrowing rates are high at the moment. So that's alongside also then earning higher interest on our investment balances, netted around £3 million. But then there was a large programme of kind of service-based mitigation, some of it's holding vacancies. We also identified in some of our management information, there's high use of agency in some services, good intervention in those areas, particularly our care homes, reduce the cost of agency as well. So that's actually a true saving to the council, getting more people onto our books, not paying as much to the higher agency rate as well. So that was a big part of it. And then there's a range of much more detailed ones, but that kind of gives a flavour. We did also utilise our £1 million contingency for risk in year, but that's really kind of how we balanced off that £6.5 million overspend. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, just Mark, the other questions were the home-to-school transport. Do we have something ready?
So the home-to-school transport, I think, isn't presenting yet in this year as quite as significant a problem. There is a problem in children's services, but I don't think it's in home-to-school transport particularly.
Yeah, home-to-school transport was rebased as part of the 24-25 budget setting, so an extra 1.8 million was added into that budget. Q1, I think, is broadly in line with the rebased budget. Okay.
And the point about heritage services was the rebasing. Yes, I mean, basically the rebasing has assumed that the positive variance from last year is basically going to be made this year. And you also had the question about capital delivery, and absolutely the
contract management.
The contract management, absolutely the restructuring of corporate services is the purpose of that is to improve the contract management to I hope improve delivery of capital programmes, including with project management. That all of that is being centralised. It's with the aim of improving the delivery.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very positive report, and I think it's testament to our finance team and the detail of information you give us allows us to kind of ask these quite detailed questions. Thank you. So we go on to the next agenda item. Moving on to agenda item 10, which is the Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report, which is the forward-looking financial report based on the first quarter of this financial year. And Councillor Mark Elliott is going to present this again. Thank you.
Thanks. So this report's an early indication. It's based on the first 2 months of the financial year's data. The aim is to highlight early emerging risks so that we're able to and not have to take more dramatic action later in the year. The main headline is that the pressure on children's services, as I just mentioned, which we experienced throughout last year, isn't showing much signs of abating. Of the 3.95 million we're forecasting as overspend, nearly 2.5 million is in children's services. And obviously it's areas like this where we have statutory and moral duty of care, and there is demand-led pressure that are difficult to mitigate. But we do have work underway internally already to try and address it, and we do think there is room for some progress to be made on that. The other significant area of pressure is the operation of the council's estate, and we've got ongoing work in that area to make sure that we are making best use of assets to dispose of the assets we no longer need, the asset challenge programme that Councillor Roper was talking about, and to bring assets back into use where that's appropriate. A good example of that is the Culverhay site that Councillor Roper was mentioning. So for areas where there is significant pressure, I should also mention waste management, where we've got significant pressure due to use of agency staff. Where we have got significant pressure, I've scheduled regular meetings with the Cabinet members responsible and the heads of service responsible, and with Andy Rothery present, so that we can first get a more detailed understanding of what's causing those budget pressures, and then secondly work on mitigations and understanding what mitigations are possible, and where it's not possible, at least understanding what the pressure is likely to be, and what provision we're going to have to make, or extra income we're going to have to make in other areas in order to balance that off. As I said earlier, with regard to the capital budget, we're currently projecting that we'll spend 64.8 million of the budgeted 76.6, and if we can keep that on track, we'll be at about 85% of the budget, which is an improvement on the 77% we managed last year, which I mentioned in my previous report. So overall, the story is one of continuing pressure. It hasn't let up as much as we perhaps might have hoped it would, but we have seen that pressure early. I think we are now quite used to and experienced in dealing with that pressure earlier in the year, and that gives us the best chance of being able to introduce mitigating measures before we have to take more stringent sort of emergency measures later in the year. So I'm confident that we are getting on top of these things as early as possible and seeing these things as early as possible, but there are still increased pressures on our budget, and I think I just want to be open about that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, I'll take Councillor Simon and then Councillor Hansel.
I'd just like to pick up on the council tax reduction scheme on page 46. It's very welcome that it's broadly on budget, just fractionally below budget, which suggests that the modelling that Damien and his team did to set the rates was probably about right. And I've suggested we might have a look again at the scheme in a bit more detail later in the autumn. But I just want to say that it was a significant change we made, and it seems to have come out about right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's an excellent piece of work, and I was very happy to propose that to Council and move that through full Council. I think it has made the scheme more equitable, and we obviously got a modelling pretty much close to spot on.
Thank you, Councillor Hansel.
Thank you. Page 42 talks about neighbourhood services, and this 1.1 million sort of overspend at the moment. I'm a bit concerned about the wording that follows, because it talks about high staffing costs. Okay, I think I understand what that is about, but it talks about the dual running of waste depots. But that is an odd choice of words, because that's policy, and that was always understood when budgets were set. We have waste depot at Keynsham, we have a waste depot in Bath. So I don't understand why that's given as an explanation for an overspend. I know there have been voices in the council for years wanting a single waste depot for the area, but that's been those sort of desires really have been sort of overcome, and we've got our policy of having the separate waste depots, and that's understood. So can somebody explain why an explanation for an overspend has the wording the dual running of waste depots?
Just to clarify there, I don't think that's about the dual running of 2 recycling centres. I think that's about the overlap as we transitioned from the centralised waste management services moving from disparate sites to all be in Keynsham. So that has now that process, I think, has completed. But I think that there are costs. There are costs during the transition to Keynsham, basically, for the centralised services. That's nothing to do with running 2 publicly accessible recycling centres.
Thank you. Just to clarify that, then, that reason for contribution to the overspend, you don't expect to be repeated?
No, it should come down, and it's a very small amount of that, actually. The vast majority of it is staffing cost. Nearly $1 million of it is staffing cost, which is to do with agency staff and management of staffing levels, which I literally just came out of a meeting about before I came into this one. So we are seeking to address that.
Are there more questions? Robin? No. I'll just ask one question. So the outturn position at the moment is forecasting a 3.95 million over budget, and that is fairly identical to the situation a year ago, 3.96 million. And I just wondered, in the previous financial year, it was a budget predicated on an inflation rate of about 4.2 million, but the actual one was 8.7. This year's budget was predicated on about 5%, and we're in a better inflationary position. And we've rebased the budget for heritage services and children's services. I just wondered, is there any room for concern about this position now as being worse than it was last year, or are there more positives that we're not quite aware of that are reassuring and there isn't something to be worried about?
I mean, I think it's true to say that it's different this year, even though the number is similar. I think there is obviously concern because that's a projected overspend. So, if there wasn't concern, we wouldn't have the number there. So obviously there is concern. I think I'm not worried yet that it's a position which doesn't have mitigation. I mean, you're absolutely right to point out that we have squeezed the revenue-generating parts of the council much harder in their budget setting this time, and as you say, as we heard, the heritage budget, for example, has been rebased by and gone up 2-point-something million. So it would be unrealistic of us to expect that to kind of rescue the overspends this time around. I think we have to focus on what is causing those overspends in those departments and to mitigate those overspends properly in those departments this time.
So I can just see one further question for Councillor Halsall.
Yeah, thank you. Just a very late question. I've got a very close friend who lives in Bristol, and she's got a son who has SEND needs. I keep hearing the word safety valve. Can you please, maybe for the purposes of our council, explain what this is about?
I will be as brief as I can. The school's budget, part of the budget, is ring-fenced and is paid for by the direct schools grant. That has been overspent for a number of years, but it's a ring-fenced part of the budget, and the overspend does not have to be on balance sheet for the council. There's a statutory override. That is because, effectively, the council is just acting as a delivery mechanism for central government. We are the providers, we are the delivery mechanism for that budget to local schools. But the fact that it's been underfunded is not something we have direct control over. There is therefore this programme in place called Safety Valve, where we work with the Department for Education to show how we can work with them to bring that annual overspend back into line, and it is by doing things like building a couple of SEND and AP schools on the Culverhay site so that we're bringing provision back in area. As a result of that, we then get capital funding for those schools, we bring those back in area, and the budget comes back in line. So that's the Safety Valve project is about narrowing that gap between the direct schools grant and what it actually costs to run the local schools. I'm going to just look at officers and see if there's anything else I should add, actually.
No, I think you've covered it. It's a Department for Education initiative to address the funding deficit that many councils face now. As Mark said, we administer following government policy on SEND to place people, so we do the placing, but the money does come down from the government departments. There's huge deficits. There's a sufficiency issue with the availability of placements in the market. So the whole safety valve is putting in a plan to address some of that and to get that plan negotiated and agreed with the Department for Education.
Could I just make a comment that the issue of the safety valve is also being discussed at it's just been pointed out to me at the the other scrutiny panel as well. But I think Councillor Moss has a question related to that point, and then we go across to Councillor Hansel.
It's more a comment because I've attended a couple of the other scrutiny panels substituting. I think you're being overly polite to the Department of Education or the previous government. Safety valve is councils showing the Department of Education how to correct their mistakes in assessing the amount of SEND need, but there is the element as well of having shown the DofE how to correct that. Isn't there a requirement for the DofE to actually pay that money back that they've given us by 2032?
I think you're referring to the built-up deficit. And that's open to negotiation, I think. I think that we certainly see that as being the Department for Education's deficit. So they will have to explain how they're going to deal with that. And your wider point about the miscalculation of SEND provision. I mean, I think that comes back to the whole academisation process and the mismanagement of that, and the fact that it was assumed that the academies would take on a lot of the SEND services that the council was providing. The council therefore actually largely withdrew from that activity, and then but there was no statutory obligation on the academies to do so, so they haven't. And it's remained the council's responsibility then to provide it, and it's an untenable position and it needs resolving.
A comment to Ian. That's a snippet of the discussions that are going on in another panel. If you want to see the box set, then you can go along there.
Sorry, Councillor Hansel.
Thank you. It is concerning the overspends in certain areas, and you highlighted children's services. To mitigate that, one imagines that it needs a super performance from heritage services, or eventually perhaps draw down from reserves or money taken from other budgets. None of these things are satisfactory or comfortable. And I just want to be sure that robust conversations are being had with service directors about keeping to budget. can you assure us that these overspends were inevitable, or could different decisions have been made that would have not produced this difficult situation?
Yes, I absolutely can assure you that that's happening, and you've jumped to an assumption that we're not at yet, which is that it has to be covered by other services. That's not where we are yet. What we're looking to do is to try and understand where those overspends are occurring in much more detail. And yes, we are absolutely challenging service directors to both understand very clearly and then mitigate those overspends within department.
Thank you. Councillor Simon?
I can't remember where I've read it in the papers, but I think we're down to 7 schools being run by the local authority. Now, that's not really a viable number. We wouldn't reckon an academy trust that only had 7 schools was viable. Is that an area which needs to be challenged, and where we need to find some other way of managing this small number of schools?
Really not my area. You should be addressing that to the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, I think. I don't have a view on that. I mean, it is our legal responsibility. I mean, that is the situation at the moment.
Thank you. That looks like all the questions. So our requirement is, the panel is asked to note and discuss the report, which I think we can all agree that we have done that. I did wonder if the Cabinet Member would be happy whether, also with the panel's agreement, whether we receive an update on 2 areas that have come out of this report. I mean, it actually was touched on by Councillor Roper, but the 2 areas are the use of agency staff and the addressing the use of agency staff within waste services. I think we feel reassured about a panel if we could pick out 2 areas and hear some feedback on those maybe in the autumn. And also the measures to address, again you touched on this, Councillor Roper, but the measures to address the maintenance and refurbishment of the commercial estate with a, and get the rental income regenerated from that. Maybe a bit more information on where we are with that.
Yeah, very, very, very happy to commit to coming back on those. Yeah.
And everyone in the room, I'm sure, will be happy as that was resolutions. Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to agenda item 11. So the final report we're going to hear today is the corporate strategy end-of-year review for 23-24, which is a report reflecting on the Council's performance during the last financial year. We've received apologies from Cabinet Member Councillor David Wood, but I think this report is going to be led by Councillor Elliott. Okay, thank you. Yes.
And I move because my battery appears to have died.
Yes, apologies from Councillor Wood. And apologies from me, therefore, because I'm picking this one up quite late. So I'll give you a brief introduction. The Council set a new 4-year corporate strategy almost exactly a year ago. It was adopted unanimously by Council on the 20th of July 2023. And this annual performance report seeks to set out progress in delivering against that corporate strategy. So, under the banner Improving People's Lives, the Council has 2 core policies: tackling the climate and ecological emergency and giving people a bigger say, and 3 core principles: preparing for future, delivering for residents, and focus on prevention. And the report sets out how we are delivering against those policies and principles. I'd just like to pick out a few highlights from the report, which fit under those different categories. We were ranked 7th out of 388 local authorities on climate action, being one of our core policies. The Bath Park and Ride schemes were ranked 2nd in the country for satisfaction. We collected over 25 tonnes of debris, leaves and weeds through the Clean and Green team in a 6-month period. We've already mentioned the Pixas Waste Recycling Centre earlier in this meeting, and that's been a huge success, the opening of that centre, and it's a fantastic facility which we hope to be able to expand the use of over coming years. I think that's going to be a great facility for the council. We were shortlisted by Local Government Chronicle Awards as for Most Improved Council. We, I think, should highlight the bringing back in-house of social care with no interruption. That's been an astonishing achievement, really. That was the in-housing of a major service which had spent, I think, 7 years run by the private sector. We were very clear that this was the right thing to do, and it's gone ahead with essentially no interruption, no disruption, and that's been extremely successful. We agreed a new economic strategy prioritising green growth, good jobs and affordable housing, which is led by Councillor Roper. We resurfaced 15 kilometres of road and filled 7,000 potholes, supported hundreds of refugees. Our renewables are up, our emissions per house are down, our air quality is improved, our tree planting is up. Essentially, it's a pretty positive report. As I say, apologies for Councillor Wood for... I'll let the aircraft go over. Apologies from Councillor Wood for not being able to attend, because he would be able to answer questions more directly than I will, so I might end up passing to officers more than I would like on this, but I'm happy to take questions from the panel.
Thank you. Councillor Halsall.
It's great to see all the colourful images and iconography on the reports. One brilliant thing is the CQC reports suggesting that most of our care homes are good. There's a couple of those needing improvement, but it's quite remarkable, really. But looking at the other statistics, the icons, you know, we do have in very small font, as I said earlier. I've been to the opticians. We see sort of pluses or minuses in terms of where we're heading with. For example, you know, we're down on planning applications, and we're up on fly tipping. But there's other comparisons that we don't have. We just have blatant. Yes, okay, we've had 160 days of filming, which is a great asset for the city in terms of revenue. You know, we had 451,000 people come into the Christmas markets, but is that up or down on the previous year? So it would be useful to know what the balance is, what the statistics are from the previous years, just for comparison.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Councillor Hansel and then Councillor Trevey. Thank you.
I just want to support what Councillor Halsall has just said. What's useful to us is to see series of values over significant periods of time. Just having a figure with, it's up a few percent from last year or down, actually doesn't give us the information. A lot of what's here, it looks bright and cheerful and attractive, but it's more promotional stuff rather than material for a scrutiny panel. So just the presentation of this, I think, needs. It may not be something that can be put right quickly, but I think as we go forward, we need the information presented in a much more meaningful way. That's my first point. My second one is a question, which is you referred to the clean and green regime and the tons of waste and etc. debris that's been removed. But the council no longer does the clean and green weeks, which were very successful and welcomed by certainly sort of parish councils. So with that approach having been taken out, are we going to have the same good performance with our clean and green team?
Well, as I say, not my portfolio area, and I can certainly get a fuller answer back to you. But I know that the aim of the embedding in the budget a very significant increase to the Clean and Green team was to make sure that that performance was maintained in a regular way, rather than having to do the specific target weeks. The intention was to sort of to embed it in the regular round of work. There was, I think, off the top of my head, £500,000 extra went into that departmental budget.
And right, third point, and I'm sorry to bang on about it because it's the same point I made at the last meeting, which is about the disappointing figures to do with resident satisfaction in the survey. We've got a lot of really good messages and achievements, but it's not being reflected in the views and satisfaction of residents. Some of the figures are quite troubling. I mean, just today, just to give an example, on Facebook, Baines has put out good comms on the drop-in exhibitions in Keynsham for the journey to net zero, encouraging people in Midsummer Norton to use their shops and so on. But of course, immediately there are hundreds of very negative comments being added on. I won't read them out because they're in a public forum, because they contain a lot of bad language. But there are people out there who, okay, just normally critical, but there are people that are attempting to undermine the work that we are doing. They have a political aim. So I just say again, the comms team and perhaps Cabinet, maybe the senior executives, need to think very, very strongly about this issue. We need a report really at some stage about how we address this gap between achievement and public perception. And I've given one example of what the council could do by just not having people being able to put these responses all over our information communications. But it is a troubling state of affairs. I wonder if any officers here can actually, or Cabinet members, can give some reaction to this.
I mean, I'm happy to give an initial reaction, which is that I agree with you. We need to get our comms more. Our comms needs to have more impact, and because you're right. There is I am perfectly happy for there to be robust and valid criticism of the council. Are we perfect? Obviously not. So, there is legitimate criticism to be had. But, for example, the fact that our perception of value for money has dropped dramatically, when in fact we've still got the fourth lowest council tax in the South West, and we balance the budget, and we kind of evidently are providing value for money. By any reasonable statistical measure, our value for money is good. So there is a gap between what the public perceive and what is reality. And the only way to address that is through better communication. So I agree with you. I think that there is a need for that. Part of the Being Our Best programme for the council involved some restructuring around comms, and I don't know if anybody wants to take that restructuring of comms issue. Andy, yeah?
Yeah, I'll come in on this, because I think the wider points around perception and reality are sometimes a bit misaligned. So, really good track record in terms of running the council, balanced budget for the last 4 years, and we do have the third lowest council tax in the region. So, Fourth lowest. Thanks, Mark. But yeah, so at a high level, value for money is actually very good. But also we've got to listen to the feedback that we get through the voice box survey and act on that as well. So the report does touch on this is definitely an area that we're going to focus on in terms of our messaging, also utilisation of the web for feedback as well from residents, and also then internally how we focus on our overall kind of communication strategy and bringing together some of that resource as well. We've got to make sure we've got enough resource in the council to actually communicate all the good work we're doing as well. So that's something we're definitely mindful of with our structure planning.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take a question from Councillor Trevey, then Councillor Blackburn, then Councillor Moss, then Councillor Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to reflect first of all on some of the comments from Councillor Hounsell and Councillor Horsell as well. In terms of people feeling they can influence things, perhaps it's not coincidental that in our performance indicator report there's between 5 and 8 performance indicators in all the categories apart from the category on listening and working with residents to act on their concerns, where there's only 1, and that's showing a 10.8% engagement with those citizens there who feel they can influence decision making. Perhaps if we thought about more performance indicators there, we might be able to go, that might be one area we could go and improve things. I'd also echo as well in terms of document coming over which we can go and scrutinise, and that I reflect we made the same comments on that at this time last year when we looked at that last time. So I think whether it's offline and outside of here or whether it's back here, I think it would be good if we could take an action back with Cabinet to come back and say how we're going to go and get that better next time so that we have something which is more effective for us to scrutinise. And are we happy taking that as an action back?
A question for me or a question for the Chair as to what this committee's remit is?
The Chair to go and take back to Cabinet?
In my summing up, I'll take that point and I'll bring that into the summing up. Thank you.
The substantive point I had on that was in terms of those key performance indicators, there is an awful lot of good stuff and things in here, and that is great, and that shouldn't be underestimated. But we are a scrutiny panel, and so inevitably I go to not the parts of the glass which are half empty, but the parts of the glass which just need the final top up. And the performance indicators which are red and amber and things on there, could we understand what the plans are to go and bring those back onto track? In terms of the renewable energies, we're a ballpark away from where we expect it to go and be. Some of the other ones are closer, and I can understand that the existing plans may work for those, but for some of the other ones, it's clear we're not going to go from 29 megawatts of installed renewable energy capacity to 150 quickly. Yes. And what steps are we going to be taking to go and bringing those things back on track? As well, I think the other one which is significantly being missed is the households in temporary accommodation and things as well. I appreciate they're not your main areas, and so you probably haven't got answers for me here, but it would be good to get those answers, whether that's offline or back here.
I think with that, if we can get a view of the group as to which ones you've got particular interest in, then I'm very, very happy to make sure that we get some answers on those. That's probably going to be somebody coming back to you in your next meeting, I would guess. But I'm very happy to take away questions on specific performance indicators and what the mitigation is.
Yeah, so I'd suggest the red ones because they're all missing by a while, but happy to take any other if anyone else is interested.
So thank you, Councillor Trevey. It's just been mentioned to me that last point can be picked up at the September Climate Emergency Scrutiny Panel, so we could follow up with that. Thank you. So next we have Councillor Blackburn.
Sorry, can I just make a point? Sorry, can I just make a point as well? Sorry to interrupt. I just remembered that. So there are also some revised performance indicators that Cabinet looked at, which I think should be coming to your next meeting as well, which will start to be monitored from the half-year point. So you should get some reporting back on some revised performance indicators as well. There's some additional new ones being added in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up further to Councillor Housel's point about format and the information that's in there. Just something that's come out to me looking down sort of 3 pages. Looked after children. We got a figure of over 200. It's very unspecific. And then child protection plans with 141. Later on it says about 10,000 population, and that figure is down in 18 months. In terms of context, I suppose for me, 9 years ago being elected onto this council, it was a rude awakening to feel that I was a corporate parent. But a corporate parent to a figure that's still stuck in my mind, 166 children. We were very specific about that number. Now, that's why we talk about context, to scrutinise properly, to understand it's over 200 is not what we were before. It's too general. But we've now got the children in protection plans, which has something that is materialised over a period of time. So I just hope that we can take these comments and think about delivering the opportunity for a scrutiny panel to do its work, because that just doesn't give me anything to work on in that format. So, but that was just my comment based on something that really stands out for me.
Yeah, sure. And as I say, happy to pass the comments back. And you've got officers in the room who are listening as well. So. And I think, and on the specific point of looked after children, I mean, the number goes up and down all the time, but yes, it has been consistently over 200, and that is considerably higher than it used to be. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Councillor Moss was next, and then Councillor Simon. Thank you.
It was just following on from Duncan's comments about when press releases are put out on social media, how people seem to respond very, very quickly and very, very negatively. Is there any analysis done of the comments that are made to differentiate between people who are genuine local residents who have comments to make and, I suppose to be polite, dishonest players who are happy to criticise anything that government does in the UK? During the general election, I had a briefing from, I forget, there was a government department that was talking about the amount of dishonest players coming from outside of the UK, in particular, who were trying to undermine democracy in the United Kingdom. I think this is probably an example, could be an example of that. So, are there any numbers done, just to check if it's a Facebook page, for example, how many of those people making comments are actually accounts that have been around for a little while rather than new ones, and accounts that are within UK and Baines?
I'm not aware we do any analysis of the comments on our social media in response to our posts. I mean, I will ask the question whether that's possible, and I don't know how easy it is to. I mean, you know, you're referring to kind of Russian bots, essentially, aren't you? And I don't know how easy it is to identify those and work out a percentage. I mean, anecdotally, from my own experience, I don't think that's as much of a problem for local government as it is for central government. I do think that there is an awful lot of negativity. It's often a lot of. If one were to make a count of the number of people posting as opposed to the number of people in Bath and North East Somerset, it's a very, very small percentage of the population. That's certainly true. And as we all know, culturally and psychologically, social media is something that encourages people to be angry and to respond in a way that they probably wouldn't had they a person in front of them. And I think that those things are not helpful. But I think, but I'll ask the question about whether we do any analysis on responses on social media.
Thank you. I wasn't intending for that to be a massive exercise, but just you know, half an hour just checking on where things are, that kind of thing.
I'll ask the question what's possible.
Yeah. In terms of the cultural stuff, I was referring more to Facebook than I was to Mail Online.
Sorry, Councillor Simon.
Firstly, just to pick up on the point that Councillor Blackburn made about the number of children in care. If you think, he said there were 150 when he first joined, and there's about just north of 200 now. And actually that difference is roughly the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who've been dispersed mainly from Kent under the Home Office scheme. So we've taken on an additional load, but I don't think it reflects additional problems. And not every child in care is under a child protection plan, or vice versa. So they're different populations. The comment I'd originally intended to make was that in monitoring plans, it's really useful to have a red, amber, green analysis that picks up on a planned activity and then whether that's being met. And none of these tables do have red, amber, green about how far we are from where we want to be. And that's something I think that does help a scrutiny committee to concentrate on key issues.
The performance indicators do have that. So the Appendix 2 performance indicators do have a red, amber, green system on them, or on some of them. But I agree it's not clear. So yeah, I agree that is useful. And
not in the version as published, we say, the PDFs as published, but yeah.
Okay, I'm happy to take it away. Yeah.
Questions? No. So I've got a few comments as well. So again, really building on what other people have said and context, I suppose. I think firstly, it's quite. I'd just like to mention. I have mentioned this before, but previously we have had presentations from the officers of a report like this, and I do think it kind of can bring something to life a little bit, and also it might. The explanation from the person that wrote the report might mitigate some of the questions we've asked and also prompt other questions, actually. So we might be repeating the same things which would have been explained in the presentation. But in terms of the... I think as a scrutiny committee, we're bound to be very interested in the approach to performance management. That's something we would want to take a deeper look at. And looking particularly at the page 105, the corporate strategy performance graphs and figures which other people have mentioned. My recollection is that this committee, we saw them back in September. The first time we saw them was September 21st, and we were presented with about 22 out of 260. We had a series of recommendations about the metrics. And then again in April 22, about 6 months later, we saw a Q3 report for 2021. Again, the panel asked to see the whole basket of KPIs, how they aligned with corporate strategy. And again, we asked for more details and changes to how the metrics were presented. And to be honest, I don't really see any changes in how they're presented. And I think trying to make a meaning, inequality in the expectancy at birth between males and females, 4.9 for males, 2.3 for females. There's no unit. The earliest value is an arbitrary year, and there's nothing to compare it with a national benchmark, it with a national level, and the value is taken from December 20. So there's several elements of that piece of information that make it not really very useful. So I think we would really like a resolution, and Council Officer has, Democratic Services have said that we are going to get an update in November of the second quarter's update. But I think it's probably quite important that we meet or have either as a part of the work plan, or we take it outside this meeting and just focus on these indicators and say what we're hoping to see. It's a short meeting, and before you come back to us in November with a report. So that's what I'd like to propose, and maybe when we get to the work plan, we'll be advised about the best route to do that. So would everyone be in agreement with that, and the Cabinet member?
Yeah, again, I mean, the Cabinet member responsible should be Dave Wood, so I mean, it should come back through him, but I'm sure he'll be quite happy to do so. And as I say, there are some new performance indicators, strategic performance indicators, that have been added as well, so it would be worth kind of, I think, you getting a presentation on those and somebody talking you through what those are and how they're going to work.
I mean, generally we are receiving more performance data, so that's a very positive thing. Thank you. Okay, so just to move on to the final item on the agenda is the panel work plan. And I just wondered, it's sort of been circulated, and actually there are a few extra things that kind of waiting in the wings to go on to that work plan, which will be agreed at an agenda-setting meeting next week. But I just wondered if anyone had an opportunity to make suggestions now, if there's other areas you'd like to be covered. Thank you. Councillor Simon.
Just for the record in the public meeting, to record that I've suggested we look at the new library IT contract and also at the council tax reduction scheme.
Okay. Thank you. I think this would be very worthwhile. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Treby. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we previously discussed some things as well, but it would be good to get on the plan there to have a post-implementation review of the city centre security scheme, given the amount of commentary we get on it, and it would be good to see what lessons there can be there to learn, both in terms of what went well and what went not so well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that all fits with our remit too, so those have been noted. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you everybody. So it just remains for me to thank everyone for attending. It's 5:30, so I think we've done quite well on timing. And thank you for your time today and preparation in advance of these detailed reports. I know a lot of work goes into them. And I hope we agree it's been a useful discussion and informative for those following at home. With these thoughts, I formally close this meeting. Thank you, everybody.